Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm Scott Bolohan, founder of the Twin Bill. 42 players in history have hit 400, including household names like Ty Cobb, Shoeless Joe, and Ted Williams, but also guys like Fred Dunlap, Tuck Turner, and Jesse Burkett. It hasn't been accomplished since the 40s and honestly may never be done again. I think it's the most impressive feat in baseball, taking a full season to achieve, and you can have it and still lose it, which is central to Vince Wetzel's new novel, Lose Yourself, when Brett Austin is chasing the mark. It features 6 interconnected stories, all centered around the final game of Austin's chase for 400. It's a baseball book that is so much more than a baseball book, and a great example of the impact the game has on people. I really enjoyed it, and I know you would too. Welcome to the podcast, Vince. How you doing?
Doing great. How are you doing, Scott?
You know what? I'm doing okay. Hanging in there. First off, I gotta say, I love the book.
Thank you.
Where does this book idea come from? This is your second novel. Why this book?
Yeah, so I think this novel is either 3 years in the making or a 25-year quest. So I think you got to go back to 1999. I was just had my honeymoon, and I brought Shoeless Joe by W.P. Kinsella, and I brought Man on Spikes by Elliot Asanoff, who wrote the book 8 Men Out. That was nonfiction, but Man on Spikes was fiction. So I read those, and I was like, this is fascinating. Just this concept of a baseball novel. And of course, you know about the movies of, Field of Dreams, of which Shoeless Joe is based. And of course, you've got, The Natural, which, is a seminal baseball book and baseball movie. And I always thought, that'd be pretty cool. And then I went, later that summer, I think we went and saw For Love of the Game, which is also based on the novel by Michael Sharma. And as I kind of was coming back from the movie theater and I'm driving along, I'm thinking, what, I think I could write something. I could write something like that. And I got about 100 pages in and then, lost momentum. And then about 3-4 years later, tried it again. Didn't do anything. Another 10 years later, another 50 pages, nothing. You always find, you get to a point where the momentum just falls, right? It falls through. So then, after I got the first one, that gets you, I did it. I can do it. That's part of the whole thing about writing novels is the idea that you can actually get it done. And, but what a friend of mine said was, have you ever thought about writing short stories? I was like, I'm not really into short stories. But I thought about, what if you had, we go to baseball games all the time, right? So, and there's all these different characters around. But, when you're there, you're in your own world. You don't know what's going on around you. You don't know what people are dealing with. You don't know what that usher is doing as he's coming up and offering cotton candy. So I thought, well, why don't we take 6 different individuals but they're all in the same place, right? So what does that baseball game mean to each of them during the course of that game? And so I wrote each story individually. So started off with the player, wrote that whole story, and I actually created the box score so that at least would give me a map of what was happening in life. And then I went through each of the other stories, wrote them all separately, and then later I just smushed them together. And I actually found, you probably know, the underlying story that goes behind all the other stories. There's a 7th story there that, you kind of find later on as the book goes on. So it was a fun little process for me.
I love that. One of the very first interviews I did about the Twin Bill, I talked about one of my favorite things about a baseball game is there's 40,000 people at a game, and they all are watching the same game, but there's 40,000 stories about that exact game that you watch. And I thought your book really, really captured that. It's very impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun, and just researching just the various pieces, like what does an usher do, like where do they go, like where's the commissary? I have no idea. So the usher, what happens when people get unruly? How does that work? And then the sideline reporter, and then I also wanted to have something that a story that took place away from the stadium, but the game was still a part of it. So that's the final story there with the woman with the father in hospice situation.
What went into research for this book?
Yeah, well, I mean, my background, I graduated with a journalism degree a long time ago. And I originally wanted to be on ESPN. This was, the 90s, so wanted to be Dan Patrick or Keith Olbermann. Then realized that that wasn't going to happen. So I went into sports writing, and I did 4 years covering high school sports and pros and college. And then I realized I can't make any money at that, and I had a family, so I moved on from there.
So now you're writing. Now you're writing fiction, which is yeah.
exactly. And so there, so I've been around baseball. I've been around the game. Oh, and I also was an intern with the 1995 Dodgers. So Hideo Nomo's rookie year.
Yeah.
So you spend a lot of time at the ballpark when you're an intern, and roaming around all the various concourses. So got a lot of that, and then then I wrote the first draft, kind of based on that knowledge. Then I went back and I interviewed people who kind of were in those worlds. So I interviewed a sports betting consultant. I talked to the A's, and they gave me access to talk to ushers and to the vendors, and kind of got a feel for the real stadium and where everything was located. I talked to a couple of a broadcast partner of mine who's a minor league play-by-play guy, and also was a sports writer for a while as well. Talked to somebody who works in kind of national coverage of baseball games, who works in the TV truck. So got a good feel from all these different sources about really what happens, and then of course, then I take that and I kind of pepper those things into the story to make sure that it's accurate.
Why did you end up choosing the Oakland A's?
One that I wanted something obviously close to Sacramento and Northern California. You mentioned it's my second book. My goal with all of my books is to kind of keep them in the same universe, so that maybe a character in this book is going to maybe show up in this book, and a character over here may show up in 2 books from now. So I wanted to keep that, and so Sacramento, that's where I live now. That's where I wanted it to be. And talking to the Giants and the A's said, yeah, come on over. Let's do this. This was 2022, so before a lot of the current drama is happening. But they were, I have to say, they were the most gracious, the most helpful. So, in the research portion of it, regardless of what happens with Vegas, they were a class act for me.
One of the things I thought about in the book, you're at the final game of the season. The stadium's packed. Everyone's having a great time. And it's so easy to imagine that happening in Oakland. And it's just so sad to see what's happened there since then.
Yeah. Definitely. I think you write it, you're in the process of getting it published, and then, all this other stuff is happening, and you go, well, do I need to change everything? But then I kind of went to the thought of, like, you know what? This is a celebration of the Coliseum and the fans in Oakland. This is a way to kind of chronicle what it's like to go to a game when it's packed like that. It is unlike any other stadium. When it is rolling, it is like a college football experience. It's not necessarily a baseball experience. Remember when, like, gosh, what was one of the closers? He was like, they had the rage guys, and they would just the whole stadium would just wave their arms and just rage at the pitcher as he came to the mound. I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah, I have a very soft spot for the Coliseum. I've only been there when it's been essentially empty, but I've always thought it was a very quirky place to go see a baseball game, and it has a lot of character that you don't see in some of the other ballparks.
Yeah, I mean, for one, the allowed tailgating, before the game. Not a lot of stadiums nowadays have allowed tailgating. And so the ability to just like football, just be able to cook up some brats, have a couple pops before you go in. I mean, that's a rare occasion into of itself. And then just the nature of the game. There's a little bit of like those guys across the bay. We're the real fans. Maybe not them. There's just a little chip on their shoulder. So there's a good baseball environment there.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned this is your second book. I wanted to ask you about the process of writing baseball fiction. What was that process like for you as opposed to writing your other book?
Yeah. I think it's for this one particularly, as I said, I've tried like 3 times, right? Um, I, what I really liked thinking about is knowing the time frame and knowing, I think early on I'm going to write this, the second half of this book is going to be in real time. It's going to be covering top of the first, bottom of the first, top of the second, bottom of the second, and that's going to be the chapter delineations that help provide some pacing for me to understand, okay, what's going to happen in this inning. Something's got to happen. Everything's got to happen every inning. And it may not necessarily be baseball related, right? But there's going to be action in every inning. So how can I pull the story through all 18 chapters, signifying the top and bottom of each inning?
I'm curious about your other baseball books. What were some of the pitfalls that you ran into where you were not able to finish it?
Yeah, the first one, it was basically a guy, an old aging newspaper columnist, baseball columnist. I think Jim Murray, kind of impacted him after Jim Murray, some of those guys. And I wanted to take him through his career from his first games in the 50s and 60s to, the present day, and but I mean, the research of trying to cover what was baseball like, Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale days. I just couldn't. It was just too big. I was trying to create too big of a world, and I was just not understood what I was getting myself into. Another one, I had a similar piece. I had one, I've always felt intrigued about what would happen because we still do not have a openly gay major professional athlete in baseball or football. I mean, we've had flurries, but not like a star, right, that has come up. So I always wondered what would happen if there was the threat of being outed in the current environment. And that was the one I almost thought about 15 years ago. So I think time is getting ripe for that environment to happen. But at the time, it was a lot more intricate. But I also, I don't know if I was the right person to write that one. Straight white male.
Yeah.
I don't think I could tell that story. So I you get to a point and you go, I can't do this. And so you shelve that one. Until this one was one that I thought was probably a pretty good one.
That's
idea.
Great. Yeah. When you wrote this book in particular, Lose Yourself, did you have a baseball audience, like a readership in mind, or are you trying to write for like a general population?
Baseball novels are very niche, right? You can only count on a couple hands the really good ones, but they're memorable, right? They're, okay, yes, The Natural, Shoeless Joe, For Love of the Game. These are all The Art of Fielding is another one. The Fireballers, another one that we hope will coming up, right? So it's very niche. But the common thread through all of them is that they're not just about baseball. It's just using baseball as a talisman to talk about other deeper things. And so I think I knowing that baseball novel is kind of the hook, its greatest benefit, and also its greatest maybe hindrance to a wider audience. But I'm hoping that as people kind of discover it, maybe they go, okay, I have a my dad or my brother or my sister is a big baseball fan, maybe I'll get this for them, and maybe it finds that additional audience. But I mean, really, a lot of this is also just satisfying my own curiosity, and as I said, my lifelong dream almost to write this baseball novel. So it's happened now. So that's good.
We've been publishing for 4 years just about now. Published probably some 40 or so short stories about baseball. And when people ask me what I'm looking for, I always say, yeah, it's a baseball story, but it's not really about baseball. The best ones are never truly about baseball.
Right.
It's more the human side of everything that goes around the game. And I think that's what your book does by splitting up into the 6 different storylines so well.
Oh, thank you. That was the intent. I mean, the only baseball story, and even then, is the player Brett Austin, who's trying to hit 400. He's you see every at bat, every inning, and just the inner turmoil that he's having within himself. But the other 5, they're backdrops. They're just there's something that's going on. There's the kid who's trying to deal with his stepdad and trying to relate to him. There's the mom who's trying to hold it together while her dad's dying in front of her. There's the lemonade vendor who's got major gambling issues. So it's all of these different stories, but it just happens to be at the baseball game, right?
Yeah. So baseball is obviously a game of milestones and numbers. What drew you to 400 for this book?
I wanted to have something, one, that is reachable but not reachable. Something. I mean, it's 61 used to be the hallowed number before the late 90s. But I don't know if 400 is ever going to be reached. Same with 56, right? So from a timeless standpoint, for me, I'm like, well, who's going to hit 400? I mean, if I'm writing this, I don't think anybody's going to hit it, and then the whole premise of my novel goes away. So from a convenience standpoint, that was a key piece for me. But also just the consistency that has to happen. And as you know, in this story, and I'm not giving too much away, but he goes in over 400, and just like Ted Williams, he decides he's going to play. So what happens if he's got to get a hit? Even if he plays, he's got to get a hit, or else he falls below. So what happens? You have to get the hit. There's no tomorrow. It's not like if you're 355 and oh man, my bonus pick kicks in at 354. All right, well that's good. If I don't get it, I don't get the bonus. I mean, this is historic. So you have to get there's no tomorrow. There's no making up for it. You can't go 3 for 4 the next day to bring your average back. It all has to happen today. So that really intrigued me to make it happen.
I originally wanted to name the Twin Bill the 406. That was my original name for it. I thought it was just such a great. Someone else had it. There was another website or something, and I was like, oh, but it's such a great, memorable number. And there's also something about, and I think your book does a great job of drawing this out. It's an inherently dramatic number because you can lose it. You can have it and you can lose it. You can't lose 62.
Right.
You can't. Once you get it, you're good. You're fine. You can lose 400. So there is that inherent drama which plays out in the book.
Yeah.
Just as it did in history. Yeah.
It's tough. You have to, and I think somebody, an early reader said, you need to say why 400s. I mean, realistically, you just kind of 400 is just a little bit better than 398. I mean, there's nothing more than it's just the number and the title. So what is 400? And it took me a while to kind of think about it. And I did kind of say this in the book. It's like when you run a marathon, you don't stop at 26 miles. You have to run the 26.2 to run the marathon. Otherwise, you haven't run a marathon. It's the same thing, right? 398 is a great number. It's historically great, but it's not 400.
Yeah, and there's really no. Honestly, I've never thought of that before. The difference between hitting 398 and 400, your season's just as good, frankly.
Yeah,
but it's just the way that we view the myth we create about the number, and
exactly.
It's the story of the game. Yeah, so that's great. So I'm guessing you've never hit 400 in the majors.
No.
How did you get into Brett Austin's mindset of what that is like, chasing this kind of number?
Yeah, I mean, that was the other piece, is that, throughout the book he says, see ball, hit ball. I'm not going to get too much in my head. I'm just going to rely on what got me here. Hard work, preparation. I'm not going to overthink it. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, and I'll get it. No problem, because the process is the process is the process. But the thought to me was, okay, but the process is the process is the process. That works during the regular season when you got tomorrow. But what happens when you have no tomorrow and you have to get this hit? Do you start kind of getting yourself in the head? Like, okay, I only have 3 chances here. I got to get this hit. What happens? What happens? Do you start to really grip that bat a little bit tighter? Do you start overthinking everything? Do these things that get in every baseball player's head, do they start to creep in? And then, of course, with Brett, again, not giving away too much, but he's got other things that have kind of just been under the surface for so long, and they just decide to appear right at the worst moment. So how does he deal with all of those things going on in his head when there's no tomorrow?
Were you yourself a baseball player?
I was a failed little leaguer. I couldn't hit the curve. I was awesome until people started throwing curveballs, and then off-speed stuff I just could not hit whatsoever. So I hit my peak at 12, and then after that I decided I'll just watch it and cover it.
That's great. That's great. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, we all are kind of failed baseball players. Yeah, I think. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I wanted to ask about the title, and it really makes sense, I think, as you read the book. When did that come together? The tie-in with Lose Yourself with the song, the Eminem song, obviously. It works really well. Was that something you came into the book with, or was that something that kind of developed throughout the process?
It developed throughout the process. So my first book is called Friends in Low Places. So, I like the idea of having a song tied to the book. One, because, if you hear it, you go, oh yeah, there's the book. You're not having to figure out, what's that book title again? You know it, right? So that was one key. And as I was kind of thinking it through, especially Brett, it's his walk-up song. And in fact, as I was writing an early draft, and I wasn't sure if I was going to, make it the Giants or the A's, I also thought about Don't Stop Believin', which is the Journey song that the Giants use a lot. But then, as I started to think about it, and the song came, and I looked up at walk-up songs. What are good walk-up songs? Lose Yourself came up. I went, there you go. And I mean, the first little couple lines, you just go, this is it. This tells the whole story right here.
What would your walk-up song be?
Oh, man. Yeah, I would go counter-programming, kind of like, Reddick, when he went with Wham's, or George Michael's Careless Whisper. I'd probably, maybe put up like a Dean Martin song or something like that. Just go counter-programming, just to throw everybody off.
Yeah, I think that's great. So you've written your baseball book now. Do you think there's more baseball fiction in your future?
I think there could be. There's definitely going to be short stories. I have my own newsletter that has some short stories in it, and I know I think there's some good stuff from Brett Austin and maybe some of the other players on that team that could still be be told. One of the minor characters is a sports broadcaster, so there's some things there that may be explored. But I got other. Right now, I'm working on like a novel about a cranky newspaper columnist and it's like a faux memoir. So it's his fictional memoir, and he's just a cranky dude, and so kind of exploring that right now. We'll see what happens. I'm always open to revisit. I mean, sports has been so much more a part of my life that for me to say no, I'm not doing it again. No way. Yeah, it's going to happen at some point, I'm sure.
So like I mentioned earlier, we do publish a lot of baseball fiction. For anyone who's trying to write baseball fiction, do you have any advice that you would give them?
I think the big thing is understanding. Obviously you have to understand the game, but you have to make it accessible. You can easily get yourself so much into the jargon and into the different statistics and everything. You have to create a point of access for people who may just have a passing interest in it. And as we've talked about, it's not just about the game; it's about the life and letting the game be the venue and the vehicle for telling the story. And so you got to make sure that the heart of any story is the heart, and baseball is just part of the process of transmitting it. And if you can kind of keep in that lane, you're going to not get too in the weeds about the numbers and the war.
That was Vince Wetzel. His novel, Lose Yourself, is out now. To close us out, we have Cynthia Gallaher reading her poem from our latest issue.
My name is Cynthia Gallaher, and I'll be reading my poem, Grave of the Crackerjack Boy. It's about Robert Munoz Rickham, a.k.a. Sailor Jack, who was born in 1913 and died in 1920. He's buried at St. Henry Catholic Cemetery at Devon and Ridge in Chicago. Grave of the Crackerjack Boy. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. From the song, Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Sailor boy, at age 3 you posed as Sailor Jack, holding tight to stray dog Bingo on the box of Cracker Jack. Grandson of the man who launched his candy-glazed popcorn and peanut snack at the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Which amniotic seas did you travel to arrive at our inland harbor, getting sea legs enough to stand astride like a real sailor, to give a high signed salute, only to succumb to pneumonia at age 7? A too early watery ending, our hope that when you entered death, you found a prize inside. Or at least reunite with the others, the Morton Salt Girl, the Campbell Soup Kids, Coppertone Child, and Gerber Baby. Yet 100 years later, ever young still, you self-fulfill many a child's fantasy at every baseball game, to be rooting from the stands.
Thanks for listening. You can support the podcast and the Lit Journal on Patreon. Until next time.